Today on Ministry Monday, I am speaking to Annie Davis, Joe Simmons, and Rebecca Wells. Hi, everyone. How are you today?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. What an honor this is.
Oh,
Hi,
thank
Amanda.
you.
Great to see you.
Great to
Thank
be
you.
here. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Thank you to all of you for today's conversation, today's dialogue. But before we get started into the meat of our conversation, I'd love it if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves to our listeners, just in case they don't know who you are. Annie, would you mind starting?
Yes, I'm Annie Davis. I am a certified cantor from the National Association of Pastoral Musicians. I obtained my degree in vocal performance from Northern Kentucky University. I am a member of Sigma Alpha Iota Music Fraternity, and I am also an audiobook narrator.
I love that. Here, let's just do a quick little plug. What is your most recent book you have narrated?
The title is Saving Grace's Prodigal. We have a prodigal daughter in this book, and it can be found on Audible.
That's awesome.
Saving Grace's Prodigal by Amy Amayo, Amayo, narrated by me, Annie Donnellon.
That's amazing. That's that's amazing. I love audiobooks, so I will have to go look for that one. So
I do too, so it's really a blessing to get to do that.
yeah, I bet. Joe, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Joe Simmons, and I am a cantor, music director, cantor formation leader, concert artist, recording artist, and yeah, and I also teach healthcare communication, where I kind of blend ministry and healthcare, but not always in the same settings. It's a wonderful kind of intersection of all the things I do.
That's a very pastoral, in different way to minister healthcare
Mm-hmm.
communications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yes. Rebecca, would you mind introducing yourself?
I would love to. Thank you, Amanda. I'm Rebecca Schaffer Wells. I work in the Northern Kentucky area as a church musician, a director of music ministry. I've basically built choirs wherever I go, children's and adults. So we love it. We've recently founded, I and a team have founded the Northern Kentucky Youth Choir, which serves all ages, returning children and youth to a primary role in healthy singing and healthy families. And I have worked as a jazz musician, as a orchestral musician, and now I'm going back to my first love, which is early music, harpsichord and recorders, but also always church music in there. I'm the child of two church musicians. Our whole family ended up going into it. And Amanda, I think you have some roots like that too. So it's
I
great to be with you
do.
today. And I know two of my singers are going to respond to what Joe's healthcare, ministry is like, because they're both nurses.
Hmm.
One's retired, but one's still in the trenches. And
Hmm.
she's going to speak to them a lot. Thank
Wow.
you.
Wow.
Mm.
Well, thank you all for being here today. I also want to share with the listeners, you three know each other. So would
We
you guys,
do.
would you mind sharing how you know each other?
Can I take this one just to
Yes.
get it started? I was asked to serve as the musician at the Northern Kentucky University Newman Club masses on Sunday evenings at 7. Talk about, boy, waiting for the weekend to be over, right? But those late night, college masses are great, and that's where I met Annie Donnellon. And our chaplain at the time was very open to supporting us, and he paid for us to go to an NPM Cantor Express weekend workshop, and that's where we met Joe Simmons and taught us a lot about what we do. So that's
I
yeah.
want to add to that. When I started at the Newman Club, I had introduced myself to the priest who was Father Kelly at the time, wonderful Irish man. I
Mhm.
introduced myself and I mentioned that I was a cantor and lector, and we only had a cappella. Just me, it was really just me singing a cappella because I can play some piano, but singing is my forte. And so I was trying to get some people together to start a choir, and I remember someone that I spoke to telling me that there's one out there, you just haven't found the right one. So God's timing was so perfect when Rebecca came on board, and the rest, they say, is history.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I'll add to that. by saying that that particular Cantor Express was very transformative for me as a clinician, um, uh, because of all the wonderful people that attended. And one of them, of course, was Annie, and also Rebecca, and just what I learned from the two of them and from others in the in that cohort. And I ended up going back to Kentucky a few more times uh, for my very first residency. Because I facilitate these cantor lector residencies. In different parishes across the country. And so, and also working with children as cantors, which I had not really done so much of before. And that was something that Rebecca kind of brought to my attention. And all of that happened in Kentucky. So it was this kind of vortex for me.
Everything happens in Kentucky.
So it would seem.
Yes, it sounds like Kentucky's the place to be when it comes to formation. So, and of course, we just recently had a convention in Louisville as well in 2022. So we know there's a strong base there, and that like Covington, Cincinnati,
Right.
into the
Cincinnati.
Kentucky area. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you all for sharing a little bit of that background. So this question is for everyone. So the first one I really wanted to start with to set the tone was, can you share your personal journey into becoming a cantor, and how your sense of call to this ministry developed over time?
I'll start here. For me, it started when I was 13. That was the year that I began taking voice lessons. I actually would love to have started earlier in life. I wanted to start when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, but the people that my mom spoke to advised her that I needed to go through at least 1 year of puberty before I started to study voice. So that was my birthday gift the year I turned 13.
Aww.
Fast forwarding to that summer, my mom and dad and I had discussed the possibility of singing at my parish regularly. And so I auditioned late May of that year, and the choir director was a little hesitant because here I was, this 13-year-old kid, and as a music director, I'm sure you know, Amanda, I'm sure all of you know, that when a kid approaches you, a school kid, you just never know what kind of talent you're going to get, so it's understandable. And I auditioned, and apparently I sold him on my rendition of Amazing Grace. And then I started cantoring regularly at my parish once a month. In fact, God really opened a lot of doors during my first several years as a cantor, because people would come to Mass and hear me, and they would hire me for weddings. And I've even gotten to sing at Cincinnati Music Hall for the Brain Injuries Dinner, which led to another wedding. And I sung the national anthem at the UC basketball games. A lot of God opportunities. And of course, I majored in vocal performance in college, where I continued my ministry as a cantor. And it continued on from here. What better way to use my voice than for the glory of God?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
So my first experience as a cantor was very spontaneous. It was when I was in college. No, I was in high school. I'm sorry. And my sister and I were asked at the last minute by the priest if we could serve as cantors for the Mass that was starting in like 5 minutes. And so it was just kind of like, being thrown off the deep end. And at the time, I wanted to sing, but I was more of a violinist. And so I just thought, well, okay, I can read music, and sure, why not? And it was a disaster. And so,
Oh no.
to the extent that in the Song of Gathering, the priest stopped halfway down the aisle and he said, "Could we just," in this very, very supportive voice, he said, could we just start that again? And and we said, sure. And so it was, slightly traumatizing. Um, and then fast forward to after college, after graduate school, where I did a master's in musical theater and was now singing professionally. Um, and and I was so then I joined a church choir at a parish, St. Francis Xavier in New York, um, that was really vibrant, and their liturgies were just so inspiring. And so I thought, I'll join this choir, and I did that, and then very soon I was asked to be a cantor, which at first scared me, even though I had been singing professionally. But after that experience
Right.
There
before,
you are.
and so, but it coincided with the fact that I was at the same time going to start teaching song interpretation at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. And so the two things really informed each other, because I was getting in the teaching, I was getting a sense of how it's important to bring text to life. And then I saw in the cantor ministry how there was a very strong element of that. And it was about the relationship between the cantor and the assembly. And it was about empowerment. It was about breathing life into what we were singing. And so it just created this incredible kind of thought process for me in terms of like, what are the similarities? What are the differences? And what are we really doing in this ministry? If we're not just, singing songs, we're not just singing notes. We are evoking prayer, and helping people to see themselves reflected in this music, and to go deeper. And for me, in my own spiritual formation, it was the Psalms that that really kind of led me into that. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that really quickly. We actually just recently released a Ministry Monday episode with Father Mike Jonkis on the Psalms, and that's a similar discussion. Is the such a beautiful point of spirituality in the liturgy is the Psalms themselves. So, anyways, shameless plug for a former and Ministry Monday episode. But but thank you, Joe, for sharing that. Rebecca, would you mind going next?
So much. I guess, we can talk about me. I was born and my parents were both church musicians. But the short form is that anytime you're involved in a choir or music in the church, it can point to ending up serving as a cantor. I love Joe's story. I love Annie's stories. They're both like amazing. Mine is just sort of like I was in the background for many, many years at the cathedral where I grew up, and my dad was the director, and we had a very capable cantor, and that was that. But I knew that I could do it. But I think that what I'd like to point more towards is, Joe talking about that relationship between the cantor and the congregation, and Annie's bringing God into everything. I think if we as cantors keep that in mind, that is so important, whether you're in front next to the altar, down front, as we say, or if you're in the loft where I currently work, the cantor's in the back behind everybody, but through your voice, you still have that relationship with the congregation, and you're there to support them and to help them pray. And so, with all of the various jazz and orchestral, the musical background, it all adds to it. I mean, I'm so grateful for a master's in clarinet. I wouldn't know half the things I know when I sit down to play keyboard in a mass if I didn't have that training. So, wherever our listeners are out there, and whatever your background is, I think two things about, that I've realized as a cantor and musician really in the church is you're constantly multitasking. You're constantly listening to the congregation. You're praying. You're thinking about the people, the musicians that you're working with. And, and the other thing is to just always be open to, we might have been singing for 20 or 30 years. And as most of us know, when we think that we know everything is when we quit learning. And that's dangerous, always
Amen
stay
to
open.
that.
Yeah. So,
I think that's actually a great way to dovetail into the second question I was hoping for us to discuss. If someone is listening and they are a cantor at any level of skill that want to strengthen their ministerial and musical skills, what advice can you give to those cantors?
I'm going to go with, if I may, to start, go with what we've talked a little bit about, the text, the Psalms, whether you're psalmist or cantor serving with hymns and maybe a gospel verse or something, text is primary, especially if you're in a situation where you're lucky enough, blessed enough to sing a reciting tone. For those that aren't aware of it, let's just say, let's go with recto tono. I could be speaking and I have lots of different pitches going on, but if I just choose one, I'm suddenly singing and there's a recto tono, the right tone, if you will, just, changing the text on one and not letting the pitches control the text. Let the text be primary at all times, whether it's a chanted verse or a metric. Certainly voice culture. I'm going to defer to Annie and Joe in vocal production, breathing, right production of using these vocal cords that are so many people think of singing and they tense up the voice. And that's really the opposite of what we should do, right? I'll defer
Yes.
to Joe and Annie.
In fact, I would love to go next. What I would say is one does not have to start out with masterful vocal skills. A lot of times people worry that, oh, my voice isn't amazing, people wouldn't want to hear me. It starts with a desire to learn and a desire to develop the talents in the way that God is calling you to do. And also, one thing that I've learned quite the hard way, do not take familiar songs for granted. I cannot tell you how many
You're there.
times it, just because I can't see doesn't mean I don't notice. Like, for example, one time we were singing, "Oh God Beyond All Praising." I had no idea there was a third verse because we've only ever done two verses, and I'm hearing the congregation sing, that sounds a little different than "In here, our gracious Savior," and I'm like, I don't have this verse. The lyrics are always changing, so never, ever, ever take a familiar song for granted. And find ways to develop your talent if you have the desire to learn. Because he gave, the man with 10 talents, he used him and God gave him 10 more, and the one with 5 talents. So you can do the same and get certified. The NPM certification program is an absolute godsend. I am so grateful that I discovered this, and I'm really looking forward to what God has in store for me on that score.
So for me, well, as a coach, I sort of soft pedal it on advice because I like to, draw out from from other folks, what the wisdom that they already have in them. That said, however, I do think that there are some important things, and absolutely the musical skills, because that's at the core. And I agree with Annie that that one's voice does not have to be sort of conventionally exquisite. It's more about what we do with that voice and how we express ourselves through that voice. That the Holy Spirit is speaking through us, and that's really what people are relating to. And so I think that's a really important thing for folks to accept, that it really is about the choices that we're making. And so, yeah, so absolutely the musical skills, but I think there's also taking the time to learn about liturgy and, just what are we doing? And
Mhm.
because so often, um, cantors can be, because of how how we attend rehearsals and things like that, and it's about the musical rehearsal, but there's also a formation aspect to it that is about what are we actually doing in liturgy, and how can
And
we
why are
learn
we
about
doing
that,
it?
and
Mhm.
yeah, exactly, why are we
Right,
doing it? um,
right,
what's the purpose of this?
right.
What do I hope that people will get from this? I mean, of course, I can't control that because everyone's going to have their own experience. But what do I
Hmm.
hope that people are getting? And so, and it can be as basic as reading "Sing to the Lord," the liturgy document on music, or the general instruction of the Roman Missal. Of course. But if I was gonna pick one, I would say go with "Sing to the Lord" because it's the most recent. And
Hmm.
Hmm.
yeah, and so and also um, caring about the people that we serve, rather than, am I just sort of like a little bird in a cuckoo clock that kind of comes out and then goes back into its little box, or am
Hmm.
I engaging with the community that I serve? And
Hmm.
that can be terrifying for a lot of people, and I understand that, because I'm kind of shy by nature, and so yeah, but it's
You know,
important.
on that note, if I could jump in a little bit, I have a couple things that you guys both inspired, but also on that note, if speaking of performance anxiety, maybe, if a person is too freaked out, just a little story. I was in undergrad as, sort of the oldest living undergrad at the time in clarinet, but I was waiting for the jury to happen, right? The performance exam. And you're standing in this large rehearsal hall with your piano. And then the faculty are over at their table making their notes, and you're just waiting to be able to play this thing by which you're either going to kill yourself or succeed and get an A and pass and move on to the next semester of study. And I asked my pianist, who's a Ukrainian immigrant, this is before all the stuff that's going on these days, many years ago. But I said, Dmitri Shelis, you're one of the best pianists I know. How do you deal with these moments before? And he said, well, I think about what I've prepared, my rehearsal, as Joe said. I think about the study that I've done on my own, and then I leave it up to God. And in performance, if we allow God into our hearts and our voices. And that, I tell you what, that has gotten me through so many tight situations in the middle of a mass. Joe talked about understanding the liturgy, and I love the idea of that because we can think about the more we understand the progression of the different rites within the liturgy, entrance, word, communion, Eucharistic, and then concluding and sending forth. That helps, especially a cantor, to pace themselves, perhaps, because that front end is pretty loaded, right? The liturgy of
Yes.
the word, it's way loaded, especially in Easter, and you got the sequence and all this, and Pentecost coming up. So there's that. I forgot what the other thing I was going to say was, but there you are.
That's okay. I think that's all wonderful insights that clearly are filled with prayer as the center and presence, but also years combined of experience of
Right.
being in these situations as well. So thank you.
I thought of, I'm sorry, if I may,
Go.
the um, one thing that I think we all have to acknowledge in the United States, at least, since the advent of recorded media, and I don't know if some of your other guests have talked about this, Amanda, but people nowadays are just so used to hearing a really produced. I mean, they sing in the studio, whoever it is we're listening to. Most of them, their voices are just corrected pre-production, post-production before it's released. So what we're hearing is this perfection that isn't real. It's not, it's not really what the singer does. And I mean, who sings the national anthem even at a sports game anymore? It's become this like, oh, we don't sing. And I think that's part of the reason of the death of the choir. Not that it's dead, but we're all like hanging on to bring people in. Most people feel like they don't have a good enough voice, as Annie and Joe have both said, but they do. God gave you your voice. It's not up to us to judge your voice. And
Yes, if I may add, I've
yeah,
often heard, and I believe this: if you can speak, you can sing, and you
yes,
can learn.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
My music director role is with a nationally televised liturgy called the Sunday Mass that's produced by the Passionist community, and we record those in advance, and sometimes things get messed up, and we may go back and do them, but we don't always do that, and so that has been a real lesson in kind of accepting um, our imperfection, and that we are still beautiful in God's eyes, and and so and then sometimes I sometimes die a thousand deaths thinking I could have stopped that. I had the authority to stop that and say, let's do it over. But no, this is not what happens in real liturgy. In real liturgy, things get messed up.
Hmm.
I'd like to add something to piggyback on what Joe said. I am often, as a person who is blind, I'm always concerned about making the right impression, especially when I'm in a position where I'm being paid. If I screw up one verse of the psalm or if I announce it in the wrong place, I always think everybody's going to remember that. And everybody's like going to be saying to themselves, oh, she sang the Kyrie when she wasn't supposed to. And like people are just going to be talking about it all day long and getting, and heaven forbid, getting hate mail sent to the archdiocese to try to get me fired. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration, but I'm always worried about the impression that I'm making, and I often feel so bad when I make a mistake, even though I realize deep down that I wouldn't be the first one. If I do miss my entrance on a psalm, or if I sing the wrong verse when everybody else is singing a different verse, surely I'm not the
I've
first
done
one.
that.
And
Well, I think that's a great place to transition into my second set of questions, if it's okay. So we haven't really mentioned this very much, but Annie, you've mentioned it twice. So your ministry as a cantor is unique in that you are a blind cantor. So I'd love to just stop and take a second and ask you, as a cantor, what tools or formats are most helpful in your musical and prayerful preparation as a cantor?
well, as for tools and formats, I lately have always asked for whomever the director is I'm working with to send me the exact lyrics that the congregation will be singing, because as I stated earlier, the lyrics are always changing, the translations are always so different, and while there is the ability to look up lyrics online, and I do it all the time, oftentimes the lyrics we find online are different than what the congregation is singing. And I'm one for being overly prepared, so I always ask for all the verses, even if we're only going to be singing 3, because you just never know. One day a director might decide to sing verses 1, 2, and 5, or to switch around the verses. And as far as formats, a text version or a .doc, because PDFs as a rule are hit or miss, especially if they are scanned images. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question. Would you mind just quickly clarifying what a DOC is for someone who's listening and may not know?
Like a document, a Word document,
Oh, yeah,
or
okay.
a text file.
Okay.
Because those are by far the most accessible. Braille music is out there, and I do have knowledge of Braille music. I also, God bless me with a good ear, and a lot of times I will learn Recordings on YouTube are helpful, but sometimes even they sing the wrong verses, or to ensure that I'm learning it right, I might ask the director or section leader to record a more accurate version of the song, especially if there's a descant. Because I'm a perfectionist and I got to know the descant, or else everybody's going to talk about it for the next 3 weeks, right?
So, with that in mind, then, how has your approach to learning music, again, through the methods that we've just spoken about, how has that shaped your music ministry as a cantor?
I really wouldn't say that it's any different from from my sighted counterparts. It's helped me. One thing that I learned the hard way, and perhaps I'm jumping the gun here, but when I initially started cantoring, I would memorize, or I would try to memorize all the songs and the mass parts and everything like that. And it's funny because people think, my husband's blind as well, and we both sing at our church. People think that we have all of the songs memorized, which is far from the case. I learned the hard way not to be what I'm going to call super blind. Because, as my mom explained to me, people have their music in front of them all the time, or their tablets, their iPads, whatever the case may be. And having my Braille display is really a godsend. Not only does it save trees, I was hesitant to use my Braille display in church for the longest time because I'm so used to having that paper and my music in a binder. And I didn't want my Braille display to serve as a distraction. So far, nobody has said anything to my face or otherwise.
Well, good, great. So if someone's listening to this and they want to make sure that their music ministry and their programs best support blind or even visually impaired musicians, are there any ways that parishes or music programs can to help better support?
Oh my, yes. I could probably write a whole book about this. The biggest thing I would say is communication, and did I mention communication? A lot of times there's baptisms and things that happen at the last minute. Don't just take over. Let your cantor know what's going on. Ask them how comfortable they are. I mean, there may be times when I'll decide to have someone else make the announcements, but don't just say, "Oh, I'll just do the announcements." No, don't let them get off that easy. For instance, what you can do, I was asked to sing the Kyrie a couple weeks ago, and there was a long silence, and I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. Like, are they waiting for me? Are they waiting for the altar boys? Because by no means do I want to rush the service. I was just, because I noticed there was some awkward silence and because I didn't see what was going on. So in those instances, what you can do is when it's time to sing, play the first note. And that would make it very obvious, either to myself or whatever blind person you're working with, that would make it very obvious when it's time to sing. So, or if we're announcing the hymns, play an introduction so that we know to announce the numbers at the right time. This is helpful, especially during communion when a lot goes on.
Oh, yes. Yeah, especially at communion when also there is a nuance to communion where, of course, we don't necessarily know how long it'll take, right? And I would imagine communication there is just so critical.
Yes. And this may seem petty, but I take it very seriously. If you announce the songs, don't just say the numbers. Like, I've been in situations where people say, our communion song is number 375. Well, what the heck is number 375? And this is helpful, especially for people that don't, not just for blind people, but those elderly people that maybe don't see the music very well.
Yeah, the most effective way, and I've adopted it, that I've heard in other churches is, please join in singing number 375. Oh God, beyond all praising, number 375. So they hear those numbers twice, both in English and both in numeric, plus the title. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in with just a note on working with a blind singer, as I have with Annie. And, also Annie's early story about your choir director when you first started singing, Annie, at church when you were a kid. Being the director of a music ministry means being willing to walk around being terrified most of the time. Um, you know what you can do, you know what you can train your people to do, and you have to trust in the Holy Spirit and their abilities that they can do it. After masses back in the day at NKU Newman, Annie and I would go through the next week's responsorial psalm. And here I am looking, sighted, fully sighted, looking at all the little dots on the line. And I'm just making mistakes all over the place. Annie hears it once and she's good. And so there's a special, but it's true. And there's a special ability with a person, a partially sighted or a completely blind person. Your ears are just like way awake. And also with children, to trust children. I trained 2 kids, wonderful children, very focused, this last spring to sing the psalm in February at a mass that the NKY youth choir was doing. And in 2 rehearsals, these 2 just became instant psalmists. They're like sponges. They were so set up. They were so not proud of themselves in a bad way, but like, wow, we did this.
Yeah, by the grace of God, we soak it up, and that's what I don't. I wouldn't necessarily say that my hearing is better than most, or that I have a keener, or that my senses are heightened. A lot of people have thrown that myth around, but actually, it's because we rely more on our senses, so we've had to learn how to adapt. And God's happened to bless me with a quick ear, and by the grace of God, I'm a quick study. And to add to that, one other thing I would say, one of the most helpful things you can do as an organist is, if you're not planning to sing as many verses, to slow down, to retard at the end of the verse so that it's obvious when you're about to end.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I wonder if I could add one thing to this. In having coached Annie back in that Cantor Express, and it all gets back to something that I'm hearing from Annie and also Rebecca, that at the core, it's about empathy. And so it's kind of walking in other people's shoes, that whether they're people in the assembly who might not have, who might be impaired, like visually impaired or blind or deaf, whatever sense is compromised. And so it's having an awareness of that, and knowing that not everyone is perceiving the world in the same way that I am, which kind of relates to my work in healthcare communication. But one thing that when I worked with Annie in that Cantor Express, I remember Rebecca introduced herself to me and said, one of my cantors that I brought is blind. And I think you might have, I don't remember exactly what you said, Rebecca, but might have been something like, are you going to be okay with that? Or is that okay? And I said, oh, absolutely. And inside I was thinking, okay, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this. I had coached a lector who was blind, but never a cantor. And so then when it got to that moment, and Annie sang, and I thought, oh, beautiful voice. And I thought, okay, and what is she doing with that voice in this ministry? How is she using that? Because right now it's just like this beautiful sound. And so then I had to figure out on the spot a way to work with Annie, so that she would be able to receive the information in a way that was meaningful for her. And so, I remember asking permission, is it okay if I put my hands on your hands? And she said, yes. And so I said, okay, now let's sort of mirror this gesture. And then I remember asking, when people talk to you, and I hope you don't mind that I'm talking about you, Annie, while you're just listening. But
you're bringing back memories here. I'm loving it.
When
as long as you're not talking without me, that's good.
Right. So when and jump in if you have anything to correct. But I remember asking, when people talk to you, tell me what that's like. What are you doing? And then I said, okay, so I'm noticing that you are turning toward, like I said, if I stand over here and I'm talking to you, what happens? Okay, so your head turns. Okay, and so then it was about being more present and relating to a congregation that Annie didn't see. And then a year later, I was invited to serve as psalmist for a papal mass in Yankee Stadium where there were 57,000 people. And I couldn't see any of them. And I remembered Annie. I thought, this is Annie's world.
Oh, wow.
I was going to say, welcome to my world.
Yeah. And so as I stood there, I thought, okay, that just because I don't see them doesn't mean that I cannot be present to them. And I have to kind of imagine them. And I'm imagining that we are, together, because we are together in this huge space. And then afterwards, I saw people leaving the stadium, and they remembered me because I was on a jumbotron projected, and they said, and a couple of people said, it was like we were right with you. Thank you for noticing that. Because I felt like we were together, even though we were so far away.
It's an amazing.
That's the Holy Spirit working through you.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Everybody should look it up. It's a beautiful moment in that Mass with Benedict XVI. Beautiful.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, my last question before we start to wrap up, again, is directed initially towards Annie, and that is, what misconceptions do people sometimes have, in your experience, about blindness in a musical or liturgical setting?
Well, as I stated earlier, sometimes people think that we memorize all the music, which could not be far from the truth. And there's also the assumption that we have people living with us that can help get the words. Again, that's very far from the truth. My husband and I are both totally blind. We're married and live on our own. And so people got to step up to the plate, I would say, and do what it takes to be of service. Ask how you can help, and don't assume. That's my motto. My main motto when I'm educating people is ask, don't assume. And that being said, I want to stress too that we're more than cantors. A lot of times I'll go to a church, and I hear this also from others who are blind, that they'll just be dropped off and people say, oh yeah, I know Annie, she sings at our church all the time. Well, do you really know me? Do you really know the person? Because we're members of the church as well. We want to get to know you as a congregation, and one of the best things you can do is to invite us to hang out once in a while. Get to know the people behind the cantor, the person behind the music, because we are, after all, God created us as people first.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Well, as we begin to wrap up, are there any closing thoughts or reflections that any of you might have that we didn't get to cover? If you'd like to chat about your podcast right now, if you have it all shaped out, please feel free to.
Yes, we are going to start our Cantor Forum. It will, we're not sure, the date is to be determined, but did we say the 5th Saturday of every month?
Well, what we're looking at is creating a podcast that is all-inclusive, that'll be online. We're going to record it. Participants will be a large part of this. It won't just be a webinar, but it'll be an interactive discussion, hopefully with, cantors and not music directors, priests, whoever. And we're honing in the schedule. We've floated Saturday morning. Of course, that would be ET, Eastern time. So we would want to make it so that the people in California or Hawaii or Asia don't have to wake up like in the middle of the night. So, of course, it being recorded, we can, when people send it to them. Joe, what is that website we're going to be at?
Yeah, if people want to get on our mailing list, they can go to my website, which is liturgycoach.com.
Great. And
Liturgycoach.com. Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes of this episode as well, so people can find it there as well.
Great.
Okay,
Good.
great.
Thank
Great.
you.
It'll be free to participate, and there's other services we can offer, but that's free and open for everyone.
Wonderful. That's
Yes.
great. And we will be glad to share that information in the show notes. And then if you have any more updates, let us know and we can share it with the listeners.
Yes, of
Will do.
course.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
Thank you so much.
I want to thank each of you, Joe, Annie, Rebecca. Thank you for your time today and your expertise and your dedication to being a cantor and serving in the liturgy. I mean, it's so apparent that each of you has a deep love for music ministry, and so I'm grateful that you shared it with us today on the podcast. And I thank you in advance for the outreach you will continue to do with music. So thank you, everyone.
It's been a joy. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
You
you.
guys are great. Thanks for what you do.